All right, Bridget, you ready to go? It's all good.
All right, I'll now call to order this regular meeting of the Jersey City Historic Preservation Commission. It is April 15th, 2024. The time is approximately 6:43 p.m.
All right, please be advised that in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, the notice of the time, date, and place of this regularly scheduled meeting of the Jersey City Historic Preservation Commission has been provided to the Jersey Journal, the Jersey City Reporter, and Ellis Specialito on Thursday, April 11th. Same notice has been provided to the city clerk for posting on the bulletin board outside of the city clerk's office in City Hall and on the city website. I have proof of this notice here in evidence, if we wouldn't mind marking that as B1. Okay, we'll move to a roll call. Commissioner Amatuzzo,
Present.
Commissioner Garriga,
Here.
Commissioner Sandkamp,
Here.
Commissioner Cronin,
Present.
Commissioner Gunther is absent, Commissioner Lewis is absent, Commissioner Sakong is absent, Commissioner Blazak is absent, Vice Chair Gucciardo,
Here.
and Chairman Gordon.
Present.
Okay, there are 5 affirmative votes are needed for a certificate of appropriateness. There are 6 members of the commission in attendance tonight. All right, prior to moving on to the next item on our agenda, we do have 2 commissioners to swear in after reappointments, Commissioner Sandkamp and Chairman Gordon. Usually we just stand up in our spots unless someone else wants to go somewhere else.
Swear them in.
They got reappointed. You don't need to stand. Why are you standing?
Anthony Sandkamp. Do solemnly swear. That I will support the Constitution. That I will support the Constitution. Of the United States. And the Constitution of the State of New Jersey. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. And to the government established in the United States. And in this state. Under the authority of the people. And that I will faithfully. Impartially. And justly perform. All of the duties of a commissioner. On the Historic Preservation Commission. Of the City of Jersey City. According to the best of my ability. So help me God.
All right, moving on the agenda. We have the approval of minutes. We do not have any minutes to approve at this meeting. Next item is correspondence. All copies of correspondence and application materials are linked on tonight's agenda. If you do not have those links available, there's a little QR code over here that you could scan for the agenda and access it on your phone with the public Wi-Fi in the building. At this time, staff has no announcements, which leads us to open public comment. This is public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. If you're here to speak on an item on the agenda, we will open public comment for each additional item individually. So if there are any members of the public who would like to address the commission regarding matters of historic preservation, you may approach the public comment mic. Okay, staff sees no members of the public approaching the microphone and recommends a motion to open and close public comment.
Motion to open and close?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the commission has no old business on tonight's agenda, so that just brings us to new business. Robert, if you'd like to call the first case.
Yes, I'll call case H23-207. This applicant is Anna Mae Stefanelli, applicant on behalf of Tom Parisi, owner. The address is 177 York Street, which is an altered, contributing, transitional vernacular, neo-Grec Italianate mixed-use building built circa 1890. This is in the Paulus Hook Historic District, and this application is for a certificate of appropriateness for the installation of a mural on a stucco wall at the property.
swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state and spell your full name.
Anna Mae Stefanelli, A-N-N-A, capital M-A-E, S-T-E-F-A-N-E-L-L-I.
Perfect. All right, Anna, you're welcome to begin whenever you would like.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here to represent the OLC School. As you know, my name is Anna Mae Stefanelli. I was the principal of the OLC School for 10 years. Retired 5 years ago, just about 5 years ago, and was asked to come out of retirement last year to be the acting principal for the principal who was pregnant. So I was was more than willing to come back and join the community. That's why I'm here tonight, is because when I returned in the summer to transition, a student from OLC school a former student came to us with an idea. And that idea was to paint a mural on Mr. Parisi's building. Now, Tom and the OLC school have been neighbors and friends. He's been a friend of the school. He's been a friend of the church for years. So when we went to him with this idea, he was happy to sign the approve or the agreement for us to sign to paint. So the school itself, this is the side of the building at 177 York Street. That side of the building faces the OLC playground where the children play. Originally, it was a parking lot, and it was then turned into the OLC school playground. It's a perfect easel for a mural. And there is where the student would like to paint this mural. And I'm going to tell you all about Matilli. Although it was always an idea I had in my mind when I was principal, I never really got around to bringing that forward. But when I returned, lo and behold, Matilli came to me with this drawing. This is her image of what she would like to paint on that building. Now, Matilli was a student at the OLC school for pretty much all of her elementary career in education. She is now a student at McNair, where she is a member of the Mural Club. So when she came to me with the idea, and this is hers, this is not OLC's idea or Tommy's, but her idea. So she came to us with this rendering and asked us about could she do it. She knew it would be a process, but she just didn't know how long. These are her words. The idea for creating this mural came about through inspiration from the thriving mural culture of Jersey City, as well as a hope from a former OLC student to give back to the school community. This design was created to represent the backdrop of the school, which is Jersey City, but also New York City just across the river. It depicts a scene close to many OLC students playing in the field at recess on a sunny day while Lady Liberty watches over from close by. The students at OLC not only used the playground when I was there, but also the field across the street, which both St. Peter's Prep and the OLC school used in certain sections. So that's what she's referring to there, is the games that they played on the lower field and on the football field. Matilli is a former OLC student now attending McNair High School. She is the artist of the drawing I showed you. She's a member of a mural club at McNair, and she has already created with fellow students 2 murals which they have painted in the halls of McNair. As well as they have a few more projects in progress right now. She's a very eager teenager, eager to give back to her community. And I have samples of her work that she has done. Here's the club. There's a mural behind them that they, as a group, created and painted in the hall. Here's a better picture of that.
Nice.
Now, how did they get an idea to do turtles in a coral reef? The science teacher went to them and asked if they would consider painting this mural in the halls to represent something she's passionate about, and that's, preserving the reefs and the wild and the life in the ocean. So the girls, or the students, I should say, got together and created this, and it is now, it can be seen at McNair. This is another mural they did at the request of a special ed teacher to make people aware of autism, and they used the color blue because of its connection to autism. So that's a small piece of a larger mural that is in the halls in a hall at McNair. What have we done at the school level is we have gone to the Archdiocese of Newark to inform them about the project. And they have approved the project to move forward. They have given us the waivers that the parents would have to sign for the children to paint the mural on the side of Mr. Parisi's building. We plan on fundraising for the supplies. There aren't many, and they're not too expensive, to help the students paint the mural. We project that if this all goes well, that during this summer, the club will paint the mural, and we would be able to have a ribbon cutting ceremony in the fall. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and speak about it. I thank Maggie for her help in getting through the process, and Lisa too. I thank Tommy for always being a friend and giving us permission. And Matilli, who has a special place in her heart for OLC, but as you can see, it's bigger than that. It's Jersey City. It's her high school, and it's Jersey City. I thank OLC for allowing me to come here today to represent them. I end with the drawing that I find so appealing. I hope you do too. Do you have any questions?
Just a comment, first of all, that the Mural Club has apparently done some very beautiful work, so I was very impressed by the samples that you shared with us. Question is, this rendering or example that you've provided that's going to be painted on the side of the building, is it going to, are they going to be painting this exactly, or is this more a concept?
No, from the students' explanation to us at the school is that will be the exact drawing. She has looked at the building. You can see the side of the building has big squares. So she has measured it out as to which part of that drawing will go into each section. We realize that because of the wiring that's on the side of that building, that it would have to be above the wiring. So she did those measurements and would be prepared to turn that into sections so that it comes out looking like that. And it's not going to, it's going to be centered. If you look at the building, there are many squares. She's going to center it in, leaving borders on the side. I put that white border around just for it to pop, but it's actually without the border, okay? Just as I'm standing here, I realize that's my addition, not hers. The only other thing I would want to mention is that Tommy asked whether we could, in one of those clouds, put his son's name, who is deceased. Certainly with the permission, we would add that. He would be happy to see that in the mural.
Do you have the dimensions of the mural?
Oh, geez, I'm sorry.
If I can step in, they were submitted with the application for application materials, and it is 15 by 5
Thank you.
feet,
Thank
to
you.
clarify.
15 feet by 5 feet?
Yes.
That doesn't mean 15. Okay.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify that, Maggie, the size? 15 feet by 5 feet would be a long, narrow strip, right?
It would be, so 15 feet, I'm assuming high,
Right.
to go on the side of the building, and 5 feet wide. It might, and I'm looking at this now, it likely will end up being a little bit wider.
Right, because it's actually a square,
Right.
almost a square. Right.
But staff's opinion is that, we'll get to staff comments, but like,
It's not
it's not
very-
going to
it's not
exceed
very
the stucco
large.
area of the
No,
wall,
it's
so.
not very large.
Any additional questions? All right, anything you want to add, Anna, or you?
Just thank you so much for allowing me to come today. It's a
Happy to have
pleasure
you.
be back to Jersey City. I miss it. And it's a pleasure to represent the student who I'm so proud of, because she was a student there when I was principal. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay. Are there any members of the public who would like to provide comment on this application? If so, you can approach the public comment mic. All right. Staff sees no members of the public present and recommends a motion to open and close public comment.
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we can move to staff comments. I cannot put up the staff report on the screen right now, but you all have access to it, and I will read staff recommendations and comments into the record. The first is I do want to just read there is exactly one standard for mural review in supplementary zoning for the HPC, so I do just want to read it into the record. Murals proposed to be adhered to buildings or structures located within a designated historic district shall be referred to the Jersey City Historic Preservation Commission for review and recommendation prior to installation. Such review recommendations shall be limited to the size of the installation and/or the appropriateness of the structure for the placement of art and shall not be content-based. So in this case, the HPC is reviewing if the proposed wall that the mural is going on is an appropriate place to put a mural, not necessarily what the mural looks like, although it looks lovely. So in this case, it's a stucco wall on the side of a building. Stucco can take paint. The stucco will not be harmed by the application of paint. That is certainly not the original historic material of the building either. So staff sees no adverse impact to approving the location and size of this mural. The size of the mural is pretty consistent with what we see throughout the city, if not on the smaller side. So we do recommend approval of the certificate of appropriateness for this mural. We do have some conditions that we recommend adopting as well. Again, because I can't put the staff report up, I will read them into the record. The conditions that we're recommending is that the approval does not include the installation of any additional exterior and or signage lighting, so no mural lights. The proposed mural shall comply with any and all zoning regulations and ordinances, just our catch-all cover there. And any changes or deviations from the approved mural dimensions and installation area are to be submitted to HPC staff prior to work beginning. Depending on the degree of change or deviation, additional review by the HPC may be required. So if suddenly the mural is going to be 20 by 15, we would like to know. And then this certificate only approves the work applied for under the application. That this certificate only approves the work applied for under this application. So again, no interior work as a result of this approval. All right, any questions from commissioners?
No.
Okay, if not, again, the recommendation is to approve with conditions.
I'll make a motion to approve with conditions.
Second.
Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Amatuzzo?
Aye.
Commissioner Garriga?
Aye.
Commissioner Sandcamp?
Aye.
Commissioner Cronin?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunther is absent. Commissioner Lewis is absent. Commissioner Sakong is absent. Commissioner Blazak is absent. Vice Chair Gucciardo?
Aye.
And Chairman Gordon.
Aye.
Okay, there are 6 votes in favor, none against, with no abstentions. The COA and recommendation for approval passes.
Thank you, Ms. Stefanelli. Yeah, I will now call the next matter, which is the Historic Preservation Master Plan element, presentation of final draft plan for recommendation to the Planning Board. The presenters are San Chavin, AICP, PP, H2M Consulting, and Siri Olson with Easton Architects.
Good evening. Please bear with us till we get this started. Sorry about that.
I have a question, Jonathan. Am I swearing you in since this is a presentation? I don't think we did in the past, but I don't remember.
If they're giving testimony,
Sure.
it's the board's history to.
When you're ready, let me swear you in before you start.
Okay.
I can go first as you set up.
Raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And if you could state and spell your full name for the record.
Siri Olson, Siri Olson.
Oh, what was the last one?
Olson.
What kind of adapter do you have? HDMI.
Yeah, I do. So, yeah, great, I think.
It's definitely happening.
Yep.
Should pop up in just a moment. There we go.
We needed to know this. Busy desktop.
Okay, wonderful.
And would you raise your right hand and be sworn?
Sure.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And state and spell your full name.
It's Sanugita, Sanyougita. The last name is T as in Tom, A as in Apple. Last name is Chavan, Chavan, from H2M. So, good evening. So good evening. My name is Sanugita Chavan from H2M, and I'm joined by Siri Olson from Easton Architects, and we'll be presenting the plan together. So before we begin, I just wanted to give an overview as to what are the statutory requirements for historic preservation master plans. And as you all are aware, the municipal land use law sets forth the different plan elements that a municipality can adopt, which forms like a policy framework to adopt ordinances. And this particular element provides a policy guide for the protection of the city's historic resources and districts. The municipal land use law stipulates what a historic preservation master plan element should contain, and these are the 3 things that are specifically mentioned in the land use law. One is to indicate the location and significance of historic sites and districts, to identify the standards used to assess worthiness, and to analyze the impact of each component and element of the master plan on the preservation of historic districts and sites. So in simple words, that the historic district, historic preservation master plan element is not prepared in a silo, but it should be consistent with what's written in the land use plan and other municipal master plan elements. What are the benefits of having historic preservation? As we all know, that modern development replaces existing buildings. They end up looking the same, and more places look identical to each other. So therefore, it's very important for communities to keep their identities intact. And in fact, even one or two striking historic buildings can define a community and provide a link to its past. And then when its entire neighborhoods are preserved, then the impact is even greater. And the other benefit of historic preservation, as we all know here, is they're often centers of tourism and commerce that draw regional populations. And in fact, the New Jersey Historic Trust conducted a study which revealed that for every $1 million invested in preservation of New Jersey Residential Historic District, 25 new jobs and $1.1 million in economic activity are generated at a state level. And then those increased to 75 jobs and $2.5 million on a national level. So we're here today to present the draft historic preservation plan, but we also had extensive public workshop. We had an online survey, but we also had an in-person workshop, which was our first workshop almost a year ago, 11 months ago. And this was the first meeting to obtain input from the members of the public. And it began with a short presentation, an interactive session to get input from the members of the public. We encouraged the participants to express their opinions, ideas, ask us questions, and state their concerns. And everything is in detail, and an appendix with the report has been included, but I'm just summarizing the main points here. So the participants mentioned the importance and praised parks and streetscapes. Dissatisfaction was expressed with new construction in historic district and rooftop additions. Historic preservation requirements can be too restrictive in some areas, as some members of the public expressed that. They expressed to preserve green space and to discourage paving for environmental and large-scale development. There was a support for reuse of interior spaces while maintaining the historic elements of the exterior, so adaptive reuse, and increased designation for historic properties to discourage demolition of older homes. We had, after that, on 27th of July, we had a second public meeting, and in that, what we did was, it again began with a short presentation, and then halfway, we broke into sessions after the presentation. Then halfway through the workshop, it transitioned into breakout sessions where attendees were encouraged to offer additional feedback and learn more about future and existing historic sites and districts, as well as potential historic preservation treatments. And then the workshop wrapped up with the final segment where H2M and Eastern Architects and the town staff, city staff, and attendees reconvened to discuss potential recommendations that may be included into the plan. We had a third stakeholder meeting, which was held virtually, and during the workshop, again, we had breakout sessions to enable obtaining greater feedback from the participants and delving into specifics about what they would like to see in their areas of the city. So I'm going to pass on to Siri.
Thank you, Sam. So one of the main components of a preservation element is an inventory of historic resources. And so one thing that was particularly evident coming out of the public workshops, the stakeholder meetings, and working with the city staff, generally engaging with this topic, is that Jersey City has a large number of potential historic resources, some of which have been recognized or designated, and some of which hadn't been looked at in a while. So as you know, there are many, many properties in Jersey City to be considering. So a master plan element update is an opportunity to look in a broad sense at developing kind of an inventory and assessment of those potential historic resources and themes. So the last inventory on this broad scale was conducted in the 1980s. And so that was really one of the primary starting points for the inventory update, was looking at that, categorizing those informations, the findings from the different phases of that inventory, and looking at what it was covered, and was looking at change over time particularly. So a historic resource inventory broadly really outlines kind of a list of potential individual historic resources and potential historic districts for areas that might be eligible for local designation or listing on the state and national registers. And this is where we want to do an important difference between those two levels of designation, because they work together but have different levels of protection. And the public workshops were a great opportunity for providing a lot of public education about that. So as I'm sure you're all familiar, listing on this New Jersey and national registers can help make you eligible for certain funding sources, but it doesn't restrict the property rights of the owner. It doesn't come to you for review. It has different levels of protection, but is largely honorific. Whereas local designation offers the greatest level of protection. And review really only occurs when projects are proposed and they come to you. So one thing that was really important throughout this process was education about inclusion in the inventory does not equate to designation. It's really about developing a broad inventory sense and up-to-date foundation of information that helps the HPC, the city staff, and the planning board be involved in consultation for potential projects and in development projects in the future in accordance with this municipal land use law. So some of our findings were particularly that many of the buildings that had been assessed in the 1980s survey did still remain and were extant, and in a windshield sense, in a very broad sense, had retained many of their historic characteristics, and that there were a lot of neighborhoods where there was still a lot of intact historic character that was of potential significance. We did find that there had been a number of demolitions and change over time, and some areas that naturally would have seen a lot of change. But it was an opportunity to look on a very broad scale at those places. But then primarily with a lot of the public input information, there are many, many opportunities that exist to protect and expand the themes and areas that can be considered potentially significant for the city, with a view towards formal designation or protection using some other kind of preservation tool. So we were also just able to update the existing information about how the city has 5 historic districts, currently potentially a 6th pending, and 14 locally designated landmarks. And the city has 35 listings in the state and national register of historic places, which are areas that have been recognized, but also have the potential for future designation. So again, the inventory was a really great way to assess what is there, update the information that's available, particularly to the city's preservation staff and their planning department and the information that they're working with, and then to add areas that were larger areas and neighborhoods that were of interest to the public, and also broaden some of the themes and historic contextual themes that could be added and considered for future study, and by which properties or certain areas might be able to be nominated for designation.
Thank you, Siri. So as we mentioned that we had public engagement sessions to get input from the members of the public, we also looked into identifying the historic resources in the city. To prepare a master plan element, it's also equally important to look at what the issues and existing conditions are. So that enables us to set forth the goals, objectives, and recommendations. So again, from page 31 onwards, it's described in detail. I'm summarizing right here. So we reviewed what the development trends are, and one of the overarching theme is that demolition leads to destruction of historic homes, and the historic preservation master plan enables the town to protect its historic resources and assets. Having an inventory is one step towards that local designation, adopting, we have ordinances, but perhaps augmenting them. So this provides that policy framework. And, there's been a rapid growth following the 2008 recession, and it's described in detail in the plan, but also what the next step was also a decrease in affordable housing, because a lot of multi-unit buildings were converted into one-unit buildings. So as a result of this, there's been a loss of units in certain neighborhoods and a decrease in affordability, as larger units are more expensive as compared to smaller ones. Then significant immigrant population with unique cultural heritage that was identified in the thematic nominations. Then most importantly, historic preservation and economic development, they go hand in hand. Now, redevelopment is a tool that can catalyze economic growth by creating innovative and attractive housing, commercial open spaces, and Jersey City has redevelopment areas close to historic preservation, and has continued to balance preserving areas, historic properties, assets, while still allowing development, and should continue to do so. Given the fact that it's a waterfront city, we found about 12 historic landmarks and districts that fall within areas that are identified at risk of flooding. So it's also equally important to prepare and adapt historic buildings and structures to withstand and quickly recover from natural hazards while maintaining the historic inventory. So we conducted that analysis and then put our heads together, which culminated into the next step, which are the goals. And these are the six goals that are set forth, one of which was to balance new development in the city with the preservation of historic buildings and districts, to ensure the continued preservation of historic districts and buildings, and to promote the city's rich and diverse history and assets. And we're talking about the thematic nomination that we've mentioned in the plan, to encourage the use of historic preservation tools and incentives to advance housing goals, and to promote sustainability and resiliency in historic preservation regulations, and to encourage adaptive reuse of historic assets. Now, again, all the analysis that was conducted finally culminated into these recommendations, and we put forth in subcategories. So under the general category, it was to seek the CLG designation through the State Historic Preservation Office. We also recommended establishing a program to provide incentives such as rehab tax abatements through designation of area in need of rehabilitation through the local redevelopment and housing law, to improve signage for historic districts, so it's placemaking, so if you will, to increase staff due to potential increase in historic designations, to explore the potential to utilize historic preservation easements, and to conduct research into the city's African American history, to explore the possibility of developing an African American history Trail to conduct research to highlight the impact of immigrant groups to to Jersey City, to educate owners of historic properties of application process and design guidelines, because really informing the members of public is very essential to be successful to implement any kind of historic preservation program. Then in terms of recommendation for the local, state, and national listing, to codify criteria for local designation, to consider the expansion of the H historic district along the boundaries of the districts, and to review existing monuments, statues and memorials for potential local historic designation, to explore designation eligibility of specific historic district that Siri just mentioned, and then to increase awareness of historic districts and properties within the city. And public outreach is, of course, very important in anticipation of and during the designation process. And then we specified, would you like to?
Sure, yeah, we just, in our recommendations in the synthesis sort of what's included in the plan, we wanted to highlight specific properties that, that came up in the specific research, that came up, either several times or with numerous kind of mentions in the public comment or explorations and discussions of looking at past research and other subsequent studies that have been done since the 1980s. So that included the Hilton Holden House at 79 Clifton Place, a lot of interest and support in terms of historic districts in the Bergen Hill area, the Communipaw Lafayette, and as well as conducting additional research and further in-depth survey to support potential historic districts in the Sherwood-Claremont Historic District. So one thing that I wanted to kind of highlight here as well is that an inventory and a historic preservation element really provides you with an excellent foundation for future specific study, and particularly applying for grants or in-depth architectural studies that provide the level of detail necessary to refine boundaries, refine areas and definitions of significance, to really conduct that deep dive that doesn't happen at a master plan level. This is your sort of enabling step to really look at specific areas and areas of interest, but to provide you with a pretty broad foundation for conducting many different specifics at once. So while we highlight specific ones, it's also important to remember that the inventory doesn't preclude any property from having potential significance or being recognized as such. It's just a way of having a lot of up-to-date and comprehensive information and providing a starting point for that further study.
Thank you. So the next step is recommendations in terms of regulation. And as we mentioned, this historic preservation plan element serves as a policy guide. So one of the things, and also during the review of the existing conditions and the fact that there are few areas that are prone to flooding, what we're recommending is to update existing guidelines to provide specific standards, to incorporate sustainable building designs, and it's equally important to also communicate funding sources, because it shouldn't just be daunting that you put these recommendations, but it's important to know what funding sources are available as well. To investigate the potential to allow for an increase in permitted height to account for the base flood elevation, which are located in the FEMA or NJDEP designated floodplain. Then to also consider incorporating the Department of Interior's guidelines on flood adaptation for rehabilitating historic buildings, to incorporate standards for those buildings that are located in identified flood hazard areas, to create standards for adaptive reuse, and to update guidelines to incorporate flexibility in preservation treatments to allow for more modern materials to be utilized, but that continue to maintain the historic character. So we also, upon review of the existing ordinance, we are recommending to separate the design guidelines within the historic preservation to create two separate policy documents. And these tools are complementary, but recommended to be individually adopted documents. We also recommended to consider increasing the maximum permitted density in the each historic zone district, but of course, continue to maintain the existing bulk so that allows to include smaller units, which goes back to the point we noticed about how units were getting consolidated to have larger multiple units were getting consolidated to have single units. We also recommended to consider amending the rear setback to be based on a percentage of the lot depth rather than a set distance to account for lots that do not meet the minimum lot depth requirement. We are recommending to incorporate design standards in redevelopment plans that are adjacent to established historic districts to continue to maintain the character of the area. Also, we are recommending to consider amending the city's demolition ordinance to discourage demolition by neglect and to implement enforceable standards of proof and to incorporate historic district transition areas as part of the zoning code to ensure compatibility with historic districts. So the next step after tonight's meeting would be to present the plan to the planning board for adoption on May 7th, 2024. And this is it with our presentation. So opening for questions or comments.
Do any commissioners have any questions? That was a lot of information we covered at once, but I'm sure San or Siri would be willing to flip back to any other parts of the slideshow if there's something you needed to look at in order to formulate a question.
I think it might be helpful if the witnesses could put the recommendations back up.
Sure.
There were a couple different pages of recommendations.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And we can also start at the beginning and kind of talk
Yes.
through anything.
sure. Yeah, and we have- So if, in the plan, the recommendations are put in a matrix format towards the end. I believe it's page 54 onwards. And what we have tried to do here is include in that the time frame of that recommendation, the implementing party, and what plan element goal it forwards. So that way, everyone can understand, and then also whether it's completed or not, and the year that's completed. So our goal with this matrix is that for Maggie's group to continue, Tanya and Maggie's group to continue to check if it's been implemented or not, and it's a good resource for the planning board, for the Historic Preservation Commission. This is going to be, our goal here is to not make it a shelf document, but the fact that you can implement these strategies. And these recommendations are all put together from our analysis since the past year. I think we kicked off the project a little over a year ago, and actually a year ago we went on a first field visit with the city staff. So there's a lot of thought that went into this, and we tried to make it as concise in the 58 pages.
Could you just tell us what a historic preservation easement would entail?
Yeah. So a preservation easement or a conservation easement is a separate tool from something like designation, where it's essentially an agreement that goes with the deed of the property. So it's an agreement that the property owner enters into with an entity that's receiving the conservation easement, and it's essentially often it's used, especially in New Jersey, in terms of receiving grants, where it's the property owner agreeing to preserve like exterior elements of the facade or agreeing to certain preservation restrictions that are placed on the property and that run with the property as it goes. And in return, either they receive funding, or often in cases, if it's not a grant-funded project, in fact, it ends up sort of lowering the tax value of the property, so it can be assessed. It can be kind of seen as a negative in some ways. So it can lower the assessed value of the property. So there's a savings that's a trade-off for preservation restrictions. So often there are like nonprofit or advocacy groups that hold the easements that enter into these agreements with the property owners. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has an easement program. The New Jersey Historic Trust also has an easement program. And during this process, we found a handful of municipalities that have worked with the trust and operate their own easement programs. But it is it's a tool that can often sort of be underutilized, but it's a property by property way of maintaining usually exterior preservation features kind of in perpetuity.
So why would you pursue the easement path rather than local designation, or would you do those simultaneously?
They can be done simultaneously. It's usually, it can be a historic property owner's preference. It doesn't have the same amount of regulation that an easement property, I guess it can depend on the program and the agreement you make, but an easement property and proposed changes wouldn't necessarily come before you. They wouldn't necessarily be protected or covered by your ordinance in the way that the local designation would. So oftentimes it can be a tool if it's a single property owner and then maybe there was a proposed historic district that didn't go through, or only they're interested in it, or they have this grant for another rehabilitation project. Maybe maybe it's going, I'm thinking of like if there's a larger adaptive reuse project that is receiving grant funding, it provides these preservation restrictions, which is sort of a separate process then that would not go through the nomination process that you would see for local designation, but they are not mutually exclusive. You can have both.
If I could interject, so there are a very small handful of buildings downtown, heavily concentrated in Van Voorst Park, that have easements held by a nonprofit in Philly. They're facade easements. My understanding is they've been in place since prior to local designation. So like, I think they've been in place since like 1979 or something like that. And at the time, they got a tax write-off for the value of their facade, so a one-time tax deduction for their taxes that 1 year. And every once in a while, I get a letter from that nonprofit in Philly saying, we sent someone up there, and it looks like this property owner is not maintaining this. We're just letting you know that we're going to yell at them. And the property owner generally has to meet the standards of that easement. It is nice because it does run in perpetuity with the deed. But objectively, there is nothing we can do from a local level regarding that easement. Like Siri said, it's just another tool that people can use.
And it's equally important to know that from a master plan point of view, having these different tools in the plan allows the city to implement what they think is most suitable, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Like Maggie said, there's just few properties. So, it would work for a few properties. It may not work for all the properties. So, but of course, that it's not to be used, it's not mutually exclusive from a local designation.
I have a couple of questions. Can you explain how recommending an increase in density is a historic preservation issue?
It's not a historic preservation issue per se, but it is a part of when they're buildings in a historic district, it's a zoning issue. But it's not, historic preservation is one aspect, but these buildings also have and underlying zoning. And we actually provided an explanation of what that increased density really means. On page 45, we've spoken about, what, basically the way the current ordinance reads, that a maximum density and a maximum lot size restrict a townhouse building to no more than 3 units.
Right.
So what we are saying is, should it be feasible? And that's something when they actually, should the governing body decide to adopt an ordinance, there'll be when you write the ordinance, if it's a feasible option, then it's worth taking a look at without trying to change what the bulk requirements are in the zone district.
But my question is, how is that a historic preservation issue? It sounds like, an issue about creating more available properties, but I'm not sure how that's a historic preservation recommendation.
Because it is a historic preservation recommendation, because we are talking about zones which, it's the zoning district in an historic, how do I put this more clearly?
Oh, let me, maybe I can add something to my question. So, hearing cases as a commissioner over time,
Right.
there's always an interest in creating more units out of the same building, either by adding extensions on it or trying to increase the height, doing full height extensions at the rear of the building. And all of those become difficult when you're trying to preserve the original building and all of its historic assets. So often, increased density, from my perspective, puts more pressure on the historic resource. To go along with that, you're also recommending possibly a change in property, a depth of what can be built on a property. And this is another area where we have a lot of difficulty, because some commissioners would believe that the interior spaces, the areas behind the building, those areas of open space that different neighbors share, is greatly impacted by buildings that choose to use the maximum depth that's currently allowed, which is 70% coverage. Has tremendous impact on the historic structures and historic settings. So I'm kind of questioning the appropriateness of adding density and increasing footprints on these properties.
We're not talking about increasing footprints. What we're trying to say is that, if on page 45, we actually tried to explain that, what has been happening and what we've observed is that multi-unit buildings are now being consolidated into larger units, which has made it lose the affordability of these housing units. And what we are seeing is that, in newer buildings that are in alignment with the historic units, we are saying that to give the ability to have more units within that, that's the only goal. We are not trying to overdevelop any historic building. That's not what the intent of this recommendation is.
Right.
Can I provide some context
Sure,
from a
maybe
staff
you can-
perspective as well? So as we were developing this plan, right, Siri and San spent a significant amount of time looking at the data that we provided them on our applications year over year. And as the board is very well familiar with, we see a lot of applications that are recommendations to planning board and zoning board. When we look at the variances that are applied for within the H zone, so let's take the historic district out of it. We have the H zone, which is the underlying zoning for all of the downtown historic districts, which is what the recommendations are talking about, is that H zone rather than historic districts as a whole. The two most common variances we see requested and the two most common variances that the board grants are density and rear yard setback. So from my perspective, the recommendation that they are suggesting be adopted as part of this master plan is really more of a corrective zoning, right? We are constantly seeing people, and when we say like a percentage setback, it's actually something that the city adopted in almost every zone except for our H. every zone except for the H zone because we knew that this was coming up and we didn't want to jump the gun. So that percentage setback would look something like we have the minimum lot depth in a historic district is 100 feet. There are so many lots downtown that are 70 feet. And people come in, and a 30-foot rear yard setback on a 70-foot property looks a lot different than what is most commonly constructed there, right? So this would just be a percentage, which is how, frankly, the board does the rear yard setbacks in undersized lots anyway. We constantly see people coming in looking for a rear yard setback variance because it's a 70-foot deep lot. They are proposing a rear yard setback that is 23 feet, so a little bit over 30%. But it's still under what we would require. So that's frankly the recommendation here, just corrects the zoning to be something that the commission already does on a regular basis and for it to reflect the rest of the zoning in the rest of the city.
So could it possibly affect on a 100-foot lot more than 70% lot coverage?
No,
Okay.
only if we chose to adopt something less than 30%. Right, so that you'll see in both the recommendations for both density here and the way we calculate rear yard setback, which are the only two bulk standard changes that they're recommending we look at. They don't define what that number should be for either, because this is the purpose of the master plan is to make guidance that we should look at something, and then we'll do an internal study to figure out what that best number is. In our case, I can't see us doing anything less than 30%, right? That's a 30-foot rear yard setback on a 100-foot lot. That's a minimum 21-foot setback on a 70-foot lot. It's something that, again, the commission regularly approves, and it matches what we've already done.
But we only approve it because it's the current, we have to be guided by what we're given. We're given 70%. I mean, sometimes 70% it doesn't feel appropriate, right?
Right, and it's something that we have told applicants in the past, but the bulk standards are a maximum, not the only thing you're allowed to do, right? And that's something that we have told applicants in the past when they come in and they're like, or I'm sorry, maybe not you guys, at the staff level, I have this conversation all the time. When people come in with a rear addition and it's full width of the building, full height. And I say, well, no one else on this block has full width, full height. Everyone else either has a half width, full height, or full width, but it's only 2 stories. We're not recommending this unless you match one of the existing conditions. And that part wouldn't change.
Okay. And could you shed any light on number of units in terms of density without increasing bulk? From a staff position?
I mean, again, that's something that we see on a regular basis at the commission. Right now, a conforming lot in the historic district, so 18 feet wide, 100 feet deep, would be 3 units.
Right.
And first of all, historically, right, just historically in the historic districts, way more dense. They used to be way, way more dense than they are now.
Right.
For a variety of reasons. Mostly, I mean, not just because units were smaller back then, but also because we've seen people dramatically downsize their zoning and make it 1 unit. I mean, from staff's perspective, I think a reasonable density here, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but right, in theory, I'd like an opportunity for us to do 1 unit per floor on an 18 by 100 lot. Right now it's 3 units per floor, which leads to these massive unit sizes, right? If you have 18 by 100, you're looking at like a 1,200 square foot unit that's 2 bedrooms or 3 but that's the most common unit size for that the HPC sees is a 2-bedroom, 1,200 square foot apartment, which is huge. By increasing the density slightly, and I say slightly because it would be slightly, we could bring that unit size down a little bit, right? I think 1,000 square foot unit is still, for 2 bedrooms, is still pretty big. It's, I mean, way bigger than any apartment I've ever had, and get an extra unit in there. And again, that's something that the commission frequently sees, and you guys have recommended in the past. They're not giving us a number here. I'm giving you a number now, right? But that is something that is flexible. None of this would be decided, on a whim. Any ordinance change requires a host of public meetings. We've been doing them for other parts of the city for the past couple of years. That would not change. I know Tanya and Matt spent a considerable amount of time doing neighborhood walks and public meetings in City Hall and public meetings in this room. None of that would change. It would all be a collaborative process to figure out what those best numbers are for us. They're just making the recommendation that we should look at it.
Maggie, just for the record, a 1,200 square foot 2-bedroom when you have kids is not huge.
I don't think any size house feels huge when you have children.
I had a thought about that as well. If the density bonus could be just directed toward historic buildings in the historic district, not to any lot, it would also help prevent demolitions by neglect. If you could, I don't know if is that targetable? Can we do that legally? Just give it to a historic building?
That's not something that a master plan would, that's something to be really
Tweaked in the process.
when you're
Yeah.
actually writing. I've used density bonuses when I wrote ordinance for other towns where it was like a conservation to make people conserve areas and have cluster zoning. You could do that. But what we are trying to do is provide a framework so that the city staff can then prepare the appropriate ordinances for what would be, because any kind of zoning, any kind of development should be by zoning and not variance. And when there is a lot of variances that are granted, it's time to go back and rewrite the ordinance or tweak the ordinance. And that's what this master plan recommendation does.
Right. Where I go with that is I think that the carrot works a little bit better than the stick sometimes. I mean, you were talking about demolition by neglect and the demolition by neglect portion here, and you're talking about how other cities have implemented that well and put penalties. I'm not sure penalties would work here. People will leave buildings vacant. They'll don't do nothing to the building for years here because the property underlying the building is so valuable and it continues to increase in value. So I'm not sure that that penalty would work unless it was a massive penalty. And I think you need a sort of a carrot situation. If that building gets demolished and then subsequently they can put a much larger, much bulkier building with many more units in it, they'll do it. We've observed it for many years. So.
Just another staff amendment here. The concept of targeting only historic resources in terms of a density bonus is something that we do in other zones in the city. As part of the R1 amendments last year, we wrote into those amendments that if you're in the R1 zone and you are denied a demolition permit for historic significance, you can choose to rehabilitate the building to the Secretary of the Interior standards and receive a density bonus as a result of that. It's a conditional use, so it still goes to the planning board. We wrote in some design standards to reflect what Secretary of the Interior looks like, broadly, using contextual materials of the period, things like that. So it's something we've done in other zones that we could probably figure out in a historic district as well. Becomes a little bit tricky when you have districts as old as ours, where because they're an older district and they were done many, many, many years ago, the nomination forms and the distinction between contributing versus non-contributing is not as clear. That makes it a little bit trickier, but we could figure something out.
So as we're taking this slide by slide, there are 2 bullet points that I wanted to ask about on this particular slide. One is the certified local government designation. I know, Maggie, this is something you've talked about for years, and one of the things we needed to do to accomplish that was to have official minutes for, I forget what the length of time was, 1 year. And I believe we're well beyond that now. So what other boxes do we need to tick to accomplish that one?
Paperwork and a resolution at City Council.
All right,
So-
easy peasy.
Yeah,
That'd be an easy thing to check off the action plan with a short time frame.
and it's something I would very much like to check off because once we get CLG designation, that opens up funding opportunities for some of these other things on the list.
All right. And the other one I wanted to ask about was there's a bullet point here about researching the Jersey City African American history. And then there's another one about the impact of immigrant groups and referring to the report on pages 13 and 24 and 25. When you look at the immigrants in Jersey City, it specifically refers to Puerto Rican and Filipino immigrants and the impact they've had on Jersey City. I was just wondering if there are any other, I'll call them affinity groups, that were considered as also being worthy of consideration in the plan.
So I think these are highlights, is certainly not to assign any level of worthiness. I would say to any, to group that could, that's why we were really trying to really bring home the bigger point of expanding sort of cultural and thematic definitions, or the idea of a definition of evaluating significance, providing expanded frameworks. So those were particular groups that came up and were very vocal during the public outreach program. So, workshops and participation periods. So that's really what drove that. But it's really the big picture emphasis here is expanding underrepresented communities and histories in these sort of formal and established preservation tools, basically designation and listing. So we highlighted them based on the public input that we got, and certain places that were, and members of the community that were able to highlight, specific properties or streets or locations or something that was a built resource that is a place to start, or built areas of the city. So it is by no means precluding any other group from being recognized in this sort of inventory or official designation capacity.
And just to add to that, and we recognize that we are identifying just these two groups when there are other groups as well, and it's increasing, and that's why we ended that section on page 25 saying that this is just a few themes that were discussed, and the list is not exhaustive, but it just provides a framework for the city to move forward. So.
All right, thank you.
We want to go to the next slide, so we can look at those.
Sure.
Any questions? I know we talked about some of these previously, but in the interest of going slide by slide on the recommendations to make sure there are any questions or anything anyone wants to discuss or have clarified. If not, we can move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Siri. This is more specific. Again, any questions, happy to answer.
So in terms of inventory, if something's not on your recommended list, it doesn't necessarily exclude its potential for becoming a city landmark, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if something's not on the inventory that we want to designate, we just add it to the inventory through what's called a re-examination process of the master plan. We actually did one in the winter of 2022 to add Sherman Place, that identified district, and we also did it in 2015 to add West Bergen. So it's a relatively simple process where we internally prepare a report, and the report's on what we're adding to the inventory. It's presented to the HPC for recommendation to the planning board.
So for example, if Reservoir 3, for that matter, which people have always talked about becoming a historic landmark, never quite happened, right? Or possibly portions of the Bergen Arches, or that's something we can introduce at a later date.
Correct. I will just say Reservoir 3 is state and national register, and it's in the inventory for local.
Okay, great, thank you.
But that's an excellent question. Thank you. That's a really important distinction.
Well, it's hard, you have to frame this properly. If you're thinking if it's not here, well, then it's out.
Exactly.
That makes us a little bit more nervous. Knowing that there are other possibilities still available to us makes a big difference.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And as time passes by, resources that might, may qualify. So as Maggie said, through the re-exam process, you can include more. But I would say that we tried very hard to give a very exhaustive list.
It's exhaustive, but that certainly doesn't mean that identification isn't an ongoing and iterative process.
I think my last question was about modern materials. There's a couple of mentions of, you mentioned modern technology at one point, incorporating that into historic preservation, and you mentioned use of modern materials. That's something I'm sure the commission's interested in because we're challenged by that on certain buildings where the materials that are required are no longer maybe even
Available.
either available or, in certain large office buildings where large wood windows were used before, maybe they can no longer, they're not even functional in the current materials in the way that they're made. So did you recommend anything specific? Or
No.
just a consideration
Yes.
of introducing that?
Yes,
I see.
because it's much better to leave it open-ended.
Okay.
Yeah, the the recommendation of appropriate or not appropriate modern materials or replacement alternative materials is too specific and not appropriate for the master plan aspect. That would come into a design guidelines update or development process, which would be, again, a process that would go through public comment, could be eligible for CLG funding, and that would be your opportunity to investigate specific instances, specific materials, specific conditions for approval of modern materials, all those instances. So including it in the master plan sets the groundwork for you within, the short, medium, long term to say, it's time for us to update our guidelines. We want to look at that specificity.
Certainly needs to be looked at, yeah.
Shall I move on to the
So,
next?
so this slide brings to mind, for me, an application that we're still currently wrestling with, where the property is dealing with issues of flooding as well as security. And, the commission had extensive discussion internally and with the applicant about reaching the right sort of balance to ensure historic preservation without, throwing the baby out with the bathwater and potentially allowing the property to be damaged by climate change or to be unusable due to security threats. So I wonder if there's any way that we could update our ordinance to better account for those legitimate concerns that directly impact the functionality and usability and whether that property can be preserved.
We actually, we are providing recommendations in the plan. If you look at page 36, 37, we are talking about what the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation are. And that's, again, provides a framework for the city to update the standards. And that also goes back a lot of towns in New Jersey, shore communities who were hit by Sandy, hit by storms, have the height increase, which is one way, it's about the BFE. So that's one commonly adopted mechanism that municipalities in the state have adopted. But that's one, but we are also recommending others for the town to, for the city to examine. So, and they are very clearly given by the Secretary of Interior's guideline. There's that book that describes it in great detail.
Yeah, so you specifically talk about the permitted height. I think there are different measures that, depending on the specific circumstances, there might be other measures apart from that might be appropriate that could detract from the, that could harm the historic fabric to some degree or another, but could be integral in preserving the property. So I think my understanding is that the ordinance is currently constituted doesn't make any allowance for that.
Does it? I don't believe it does. I don't remember on the top of my head.
In this specific instance, our ordinance does have some leeway that we have used in the past for sustainability measures. Like the most common one we see are things like solar panels, which we review as a utilitarian and mechanical installation on a rooftop, so you guys don't see them. Usually you see all rooftop installations, especially when they're additions or leisure space, but we count solar panels kind of similarly to like a air conditioning compressor. And we're able to do it that way. Other installations, like the one you're referencing, really don't comfortably fit in any place in our ordinance. They are like quite literally counted as an addition to the building.
And that's the issue. I don't know that, I think we're kind of tying one hand behind our back if we try to carve out specific methods of addressing climate change, especially because we don't know how things are going to play out in the next couple of years, let alone decades. And so there may be introduction of and development of new technologies, new best practices, and I think we need to be flexible in adopting those. And so maybe one of the ways of doing that would be to simply make preserving the property and preserving and protecting it from these flood events and other catastrophic weather issues a consideration, just one factor for us to balance against others, and that would give us some additional flexibility so long as there's some guardrails in place and general guidelines. So it's just a thought at this point.
I mean, I understood, and we also are looking at it more from a, 100-foot above. There are other ways you could do that. In older cities, most of the times the flooding is due to stormwater management or having a higher percentage of impervious surface coverage. So when we talk about incorporation of sustainable buildings design, what we went into detail in the master plan is options of a green roof, options of having, when you're talking about best management practices, the DEP stormwater management regulations from 2005 until now have changed drastically over the years, and they will always overrule any local ordinance. So, but from our end, when it comes to preserving historic preservation, what are the different mechanisms that the town can adopt? One of which is, these are the guidelines. Based on that guidelines, look into having specific standards that apply to Jersey City. So that's the whole goal behind this recommendation. And these recommendations sometimes tie into each other. Like, for example, having sustainable building designs or having green infrastructure. So that was the thought process when we put in these recommendations.
And to add to that the master plan element is really an opportunity for expressing preservation opportunities and challenges and sort of expressing what could be accomplished in the future. So this is this is exactly the expression to say this is a challenge that's facing Jersey City, and more specific, guidelines or parameters and direction, but also flexibility given these considerations, flexibility for a property owner, flexibility for you and for staff. Those are priorities for the city, and the way that you could then implement those is through updated design guidelines and or ordinance updates. So we can understand how sometimes we want to get into the specifics, what those parameters are, but this is really the step to say developing those parameters is a priority for the city, because this is a challenge that's being faced that your current ordinance or your current standards kind of aren't totally covering. As Maggie said, you have new technologies and new gaps that you need new guidelines to fill. And so this is kind of that interim step to say this is how we get there.
Right. So I'm not flagging any specific. I'm not making a specific recommendation, but I do think that could be something to be earmarked that we can build a better mousetrap, so to speak.
And we commonly see in design guidelines now kind of provisions for new technologies. You can list out examples and provide guidance for visibility and where things should be placed, how things might be screened, but then including some general parameters for applicants that say, as if you have a new technology that's not covered in these districts, come to your staff, come with these questions, consider the visibility, consider the color, consider how many penetrations you might need, bring that information to the HPC, to the staff, and we'll consider it within these contexts. We're always trying to balance it. So we are seeing design guidelines develop with those kind of caveats, shall we say.
Right, and just to bring it back to this situation, I think the ordinance governs how we evaluate specific cases, and if there's a factor that's not specifically enumerated under the ordinance, it's outside of our purview. So this is just something, when we're talking about preservation of property in the face of climate change or security considerations, I think those should be somehow accounted for to give us the ability to explicitly consider those factors in our determinations. And then just moving on from that, the bullet point on creating standards for adaptive reuse, is that referring to preserving the exterior facade of the, okay. So my comment on that would be that the interior of the building is always seemingly an afterthought for us. I feel like in the time that I've been on the commission, we have rarely, if ever, considered the interior. We're really mostly concerned with the exterior that's visible from a public right-of-way, primarily the primary facade of the building. And I'm all in favor of adaptive reuse. I do think, though, to me, it brings to mind, if you go to, I don't know, I haven't been to Disney World in a while, but when I went there many years ago, they had those cartoon villages, and it's just, there's doors and awnings and everything, and there's knobs on the doors, but if you try to turn them, they don't turn because there's nothing behind them. And I just would not want to see our historic resources turned into, that Disney World model where there's a historic facade and then absolutely nothing, just a completely modern interior and structure behind it. So I think there is a place for adaptive reuse, but we should also consider preserving the interior of the building as well, because for me, part of the value of the historic structures is its living history, and it's something that we can actually walk through and experience rather than just reading it in a book. So I wouldn't want to give that up without a fight.
All of that would be discussed as we develop those guidelines, if we choose to do so. Because that's the other part, is not to discredit or play down any work that you guys have done on this. The recommendations in the last master plan we did not go through with all of them, mostly because of time availability and staff availability and resources. But if we develop those guidelines, we will do it in context of everything we know and everything we think is coming down the line.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Just playing the hand I've been dealt here.
I know. Same.
Quick question. The tax abatement, the 5-year initiative that was mentioned here, do we currently have one? Or that's...
Go back a slide, maybe? Are you talking,
You talk about area in need of rehabilitation. You do have area in need of rehabilitation, and that allows short-term tax abatements. So, but we are saying to continue that. We're putting that as a recommendation.
To continue it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because we're talking about what are the different resources available to the city to continue resources. And this is a very valuable resource that a lot of times people are not even aware of it. And so that's why putting that in the master plan is a way of reminding people that you have this. This is a resource.
And Maggie, you said that there was like a nonprofit who checks in like once a year?
No, that's
so I think you're confusing the area in need of rehabilitation
Okay.
and the easement. An easement, there is that, when people have done easements in the past, and again, like these easements are very, 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 very old. And I at least have not seen any new ones. That does not mean to say that they don't exist, because the city does not control these easements. But usually in the experience I have with the easements that are held in Jersey City, they're either held by a nonprofit. The most common one I see, I can't even remember the name of it out of Philly. I just know it's out of Philly because the first time I got a letter, I was a little bit confused. And there were a couple of them held by the New Jersey Historic Trust as a result of grant funding. on different historic sites in Jersey City that have gotten capital grant funding from the New Jersey Historic Trust, like the Apple Tree House and the Lowe's.
So how do we enforce that if like they don't keep up with it on the rehabilitation side?
So, do you mean the easement or the area in need of rehabilitation?
Area in need of rehabilitation, like let's say an initial.
I'm looking at Tanya because she might be better off answering this than me.
Sure.
Switch quick.
You're talking about enforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the planning department has really no reach of enforcement. It's a violation that goes out and gets handled at municipal court most likely. It really is kind of, at that case, once the violation goes out, it's really in the hand of the prosecutor and the municipal court. What I see more than not working with the zoning is that people are more than willing to pay the fine and keep doing the wrong thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Let's maybe take a 5-minute recess?
Sure. Do we have, well, before we do that, do we have more questions on these? Or just only because we're at the end of the presentation?
Was there another slide?
Yes.
We've been going back, we got all the way to the end. We've been going back and forth. So I think we were here and
Yes.
this is the last one,
This
yeah.
is the last one.
We just, in the interest
Yeah.
of, I'm more than happy to take a break. Just if we have one slide left, let's just finish out the presentation.
Sounds good.
And we've touched on a couple of these
Yeah, we've-
already as
right.
well.
We actually did, almost all of them.
All right. Can you just talk a little bit about what a historic district transition area would entail?
Sure. So, historic, so we've not specified the boundaries for that. We're just saying that we noticed a year ago when we went on a field visit how the district ended, and then you had a building next to it which was 20 stories high, completely deterring from what the historic district, like you step back a few steps and it's like, wow. And then you go out and it's like, oh, wow, you know? So based on that, what we were recommending is that we understand that there will be development. We understand that, you know, the market really, the market is a driving force for any kind of development happening. Now, what we could hear from our end is ensure that that development happens in such a way that you continue to keep the character. And that's why we are recommending establishing transition zones. And in fact, you have many redevelopment areas in your in the city that are proximate to historic preservation zones who have continued to sort of establish a transition area in their design guidelines. And what we are saying is to go beyond just those redevelopment areas and have that for the city to determine what those boundaries would be. So again, I want to make it very clear that we are not recommending to enforce stringent guidelines, but to transition it out. So maybe in terms of how the buildings would look or how the density would be. Like if there's a 4-story structure and a 20-story next to it, isn't a great transition from one area to the other.
Yeah, I know that we've said to applicants in the past, you know, not in such harsh terms, but essentially, you know, you knew what you were buying into. You were buying into a historic district, and that comes with certain responsibilities. I have some concern that someone who didn't buy into a historic district might take umbrage with being told how to develop their property. So I guess you're saying it wouldn't be
It will not,
too
no.
restrictive.
No, it should not be. It's more to that's why the word is transition. And again, you know, we're making this recommendation, the city staff, when they develop the ordinances, again, get vetted out. You know, there is no, again, no restriction in terms of the kind of materials or anything. It's just the appearance, and maybe in terms of how dense it can be, or it's very broad at this point, but we are allowing you and the HPC or the city or the, planning board to actually put forth ordinances that would protect your interest.
And it would be
from-
more about, oh, okay.
No, Sarah, you go.
I was
Finish
just
it
saying
up.
that it'd be more broad in the things about more sort of typically about massing or contextual cues from the buildings around there. So, kind of, we see sometimes like percentage-based increases in height or setbacks, or it's much more about being kind of contextual rather than the same process of a certificate of appropriateness with the guidelines and through that stringent element. So it's kind of picking those broader parameters, as you say, and where there's flexibility and where there's, a couple guiding
And
components to hold to.
And also the ordinance would probably, I've seen those where you set forth 5 or 6 points and give any potential developer option, select 3 of these or 4 of these. So the whole idea is to not have stark contrast next to each other.
Just from a city perspective, if your concern is just how we have these design guidelines and it, like someone else who owns, like every zone in the city, regardless of if it's a historic zone or not, has design guidelines. It's something we already have. They're just, ours are heavily enforceable because of the MLUL, and we have like very thorough design guidelines. The zones in the city, throughout the city that have design guidelines, they're like Siri and Sansa, more contextual, talking about picking up on cues and roofline shapes and adjacent heights and adjacent setbacks and things like that.
And would the HPC have any involvement with
No.
enforcement? No. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
So then we can take that 5-minute.
We can,
recess.
yes, now that we've reached the end of the presentation, I would recommend we take a 5-minute recess.
And thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, do you want to just put on the record what time we're all coming back?
So it's 8:19. We'll come back at 8:24.
Bridget, just let us know when you're ready.
All right. I'll call the meeting back to order. It's 8:25.
All right, are there any additional questions from commissioners before we open public comment? All right, if there are any members of the public present who would like to provide comment, I'll ask you to step up to the mic in just a moment. I do just want to review what public comment looks like at the HPC. Everyone is allotted 3 minutes for public comment. I will keep time up here. I will do my best to warn you when you have between a minute to 45 seconds left. I'll try not to cut you off. Sometimes I do. Sorry about that in advance. All questions should be directed to the chair. Myself and Michael will write them down. Following the end of public comment, we will get all of your questions answered from our professionals. We don't stop public comment to answer them as we go. I think that covers it. And we will swear you in at the beginning of public comment, so I'll start your timer once you are sworn. Okay. That being said, if anyone would like to make a motion to open public comment,
Motion.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And anyone who's interested in public comment can approach the mic.
Hello,
Hello.
my name is Natalie Callback, N-A-T-H. Oh, yeah, no, I'm getting ahead of myself.
You raise your right hand and be sworn. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And your full name and spell?
It's Natalie, N-A-T-H-A-L-I-E, Callback, K-A-L-B-A-C-H.
Okay. Natalie, your 3 minutes starts now.
Okay. Hello, good evening. I'm here for the Jersey City Landmarks Commission. I am a trustee, so we submitted a letter that was co-signed by several community organizations regarding the Historic Preservation Master Plan And while we appreciate some of the changes reflecting the concerns, I'd like to emphasize 3 key points, 3 minutes, 3 key points, I guess. Firstly, there remains a lack of clarity regarding staffing in the action plan. The increase in staffing needs to ensure efficient handling of existing tasks, which we think is not provided right now, while also addressing the new responsibilities that are outlined in the action plan, such as additional districts, community outreach, and landmarking efforts. The current master plan draft lacks a clear ratio and guideline for the staffing increase, and we think that it's crucial for budgeting and operational efficiency. Really highly recommend looking this over. Secondly, while some outreach efforts like workshops and at farmers markets were made to include public outreach or communities' vision and goals in the master plan, we think that these efforts were kind of lacking, especially regarding underrepresented communities. I want to underscore that the JCLC swiftly brought together 18 organizations citywide for collaborative feedback after the master plan draft was posted for feedback. And we even held a workshop to address key elements and concerns, which we reflected in our letter to the HPO. And we seek a more substantial partnership in general, a partnership role to enhance community engagement strategies and bridge the gap between community organizations and the Preservation Office.
1 minute.
Lastly, we're also here to broaden the focus from just high-style architecture to a plan that embraces preservation and capacity that everyday people can relate to. Many of our culturally and historically significant buildings worthy of preservations are actually not high-style, but they are nonetheless important to our communities. So in conclusion, I would urge clear staffing plans and enhanced community engagement strategies to create a more inclusive and effective historic preservation master plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Raise your right hand, please stand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Just state and spell your name, please.
Charlene Burke, CHARLENE BURKE. Good evening, Commissioners.
Good to go, Charlene.
Firstly, I have to say, I'm amazed that you all read this plan from beginning to end, given that you just got it the end of last week. And I didn't get to read it all, but I have a few comments. Firstly, to speak on Nathalie's point, staffing has to be number one on this plan. Even in the executive summary, it should be called out specifically as an increase of staffing to address the current needs of what historic preservation is in the city, as well as anything else that this plan presents. Because without adequate staffing, you're just not going to do any of this, honestly, in this city. Number 2, the one thing under point number 2, it had seek CLG, establish incentive programs, etc. I want to see an increased online accessibility of current and future revised historic resource surveys. They should be available online for any of us to read and download and look at all the time. And I find that digging into this database or the city's website is just a horror in finding this kind of information. Community engagement. I really have a problem with how this went. Come on. We had very little community engagement. I attended all the meetings, 40, 50 people. That's not enough out of this city that really are affected by historic districts or potential historic districts. I don't believe the recordings of the virtual workshop were ever put online as it claims, because I know we kept asking about them all the time. Farmers markets. Okay, 7 out of 8 of them. They were all downtown. How about my farmers market in Lincoln Park? In my West Bergen, East Lincoln Park Historic District. They didn't even have one in ours. I mean, our community goes to that every Sunday, but yet they didn't ever do outreach there. Okay. Page 9 has a map.
1 minute.
There's a lot of errors on that map. I suggest it be reviewed. Those listings of items, numbers don't match items. Number 3's missing. 10 and 14 are the same. 19's not even on the map. Recommendations, add more local designations. Cannot be overstated. Greater efforts should be made to designate additional resources. Excuse me, we have Sherman Place who it's the community who is doing it, not Jersey City. The community raised their own funds and hired Hunter Research to do the research about their houses. And now they're actually applying for a New Jersey Trust grant to go and pay for the additional monies it needs to do the nomination. Where's Jersey City in that that whole thing? I mean, really, you have this list, but where is Jersey City in getting this done?
If you
Even
could
when West
wrap it
Bergen
up,
was
please.
being done, West Bergen, if I wasn't involved in that, West Bergen would never have been done either. Because Jersey City doesn't make this important. Sorry, I have a lot more, but I'm out of time.
If there's anyone else, they're welcome to read off your sheet.
Thank you, Ms. Burke.
You can also submit the comments in writing in email.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Nathan McCormick, Nathan. Last name is Maccormack.
3 minutes starts now.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I would like to simply reiterate the same hope and desire that's already been expressed for whether it's an increase in the budget for the Office of Historic Preservation or whatever means is necessary to increase the staffing in that department. My wife, Shireen, and I purchased a home on Glenwood Avenue about 5 years ago. And when we first purchased the home, I was honestly relieved that our house was not in the historic district because I felt like any, renovation that I wanted to do would be much easier. In the last few years, our block has received quite a bit of media coverage because we actually have a huge amount of development going on to the point that we're now clamoring and contacting anyone and everyone that we can to turn our row of historic homes into a historic district to protect us from the development that is, infringing on our territory. And so, again, I think our situation cannot be unique when you look at the number of high rises going up around the Journal Square area and the McGinley Square area. So again, just reiterating that hope for increased staffing. At the same time, we did fill out the questionnaire and survey that's being discussed this evening, and while most of our block is on the list, somehow our property was excluded of 130 Glenwood. So that's just something that hopefully can be addressed before it's too late. And I think that was everything I wanted to discuss. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other members of the public who wish to provide public comment?
Hello.
Raise your right hand and be sworn. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
State and spell your full name.
Shireen McCormack, SHIRINMACCORMACK.
Okay. 3 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Jersey City and his HP department for revising the master plan element for HP. I am the president of the McKinley Square Community Board, and this year received a Women of Action Award for Boggiano's Ward. As well, I'm newly on the board of the Jersey City Landmarks Conservancy. Historic preservation remains at the very heart and core of our community group's earliest days of formation 1 year ago. We seek to preserve cohesively the Mayhew Terrace from 120 to 130 Glenwood with its architectural and sociocultural significance. Okay. And protect the cohesive Mayhew Terrace from 120 to 130 Glenwood with its architectural and sociocultural historical significance, now well within public awareness, based on research uncovered by JC Landmarks Conservancy. We began due to events that we think were influenced by some gaps and oversights within the current HP plan regarding our 1895 Queen Anne Victorian Mayhew Terrace cottages, which stood for 128 years, framed by an ancient stone wall atop a hill. They were the first structures of their kind, and now they're the last ones north of Montgomery. They are 1 mayor block from the designated West Bergen East Lincoln Park Historic District, and they are some of the last vestiges of affordable housing and of lower density in this area. What gets built ends up multi-units that are each 250% more in cost than an entire property once the initial thing gets demoed. On January 25th at zoning, a developer attorney implied that maybe these don't belong here anymore. On the contrary, we believe that not only do they belong preserved and protected with historic designation. It also aligns with the city's goal of preserving locations with diversity, sustainability, and adaptive reuse. So thanks for including them now for the first time in this recent revised draft. Please, to better capture public input, also include the Mayhew Terrace's westernmost 130 Glenwood and consider the greater block for surveys to capture the greater context of the existing area, including all the large apartments up the hill, and also the 138 to 140 St. Peter's dorms already considered by Hunter Research and the AP office as significant. Also, please increase the funding. Other people spoke on that. And please become a CLG ASAP. Also,
1 minute.
Okay. Please, caring about the city's historic, unique architectural and cultural treasures, please consider adding, if it isn't already, Moore's Lounge, St. Aidan's in the building, slated to become the Pompidou Museum, in case anything happens there. And while you can add properties later, this is the time. The time is now. It's best to do it now because, yes, Sherman Place is doing it, but it has been a whole long, complicated process that residents had to, as Charlene said, pay out of their own pocket. Please consider expanding the ethnic diversity mentions in the current draft. And also, please consider requiring a notification letter for demo applications on buildings that are over 50 years old.
If you could wrap it up, just 'cause your time is up.
A notification letter and holding a public hearing for applications on buildings over 50 years old. Please also, lastly, commit to formally revising the plan again in 10 years, in 2034, rather than another expansive 20 plus years. This iteration will endure for at least 10 years, so let's please be sure to make sure we get it right. Now more than ever, it's now or never. Preserve today, before gone forever.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to provide comment? Okay, staff sees none and recommends a motion to close public comment.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So there were a couple of, not many, a couple of questions that came up or items that I think staff can address as a result of that public comment. The first, Charlene, regrettably, we did not make it to the Lincoln Park Farmers Market, not out of any reason other than I contacted them every 2 weeks from April until October, and I never once heard back. I can't just show up with a table. It was very, very, very frustrating. I don't live in the area, but I did go one Sunday or Saturday. Admittedly, I went to so many, I can't remember which day each one is. Sunday. And I couldn't even find anyone to talk to. I asked around and people would say, oh, I'll go grab them. And then I stood there for like 40 minutes. It's something I would have very much liked to do. We had planned, when we planned out which farmers markets we would like to attend and what kind of schedule, we had put them on the schedule 3 separate times because we know West Bergen can be difficult to get public feedback from. So it was certainly upsetting that we were not able to table at that farmers market. For the inventory, I will be honest, I have no idea how we missed 1:30. I went through Glenwood last week to make sure we hit it all, and I did not hit it all. So I will make sure 1:30 and 1:30 and the building directly adjacent to you are also added to the inventory. St. Aidan's, Moore's Lounge, and I don't remember the last one. Pompano, yes, they're all either in the inventory or covered within a redevelopment plan as a historic zone. And then regarding notification for demolitions, that is something that unfortunately we are not able to do. We had tried to do something similar and when I say tried, I mean many, many, many years ago, in historic districts, notification when applications would be heard. And it was struck down by the courts because it exceeds the MLUL. So a municipality cannot make their own law that goes beyond what is required in the state law. So it was struck down. I will say, though, as part of our revised hearing process for demolitions in the city, so like under our current ordinance, the HPC does review all applications for buildings that are recommended to be denied a demolition permit, because that's something that staff can no longer do at a staff administrative level. So the HPC does get those applications where they review the ones that are recommended for demo and make the recommendation themselves to the zoning officer. Did I miss anyone else?
Yes, you missed a big one.
What?
The funding of the Historic Preservation Office. And the list that's provided in the overview that was created here gives us a lot of work to do too. Check out the list at the back. A lot of things they want the commission to take care of, and the question is how. And you know, if we could fund Historic Preservation Department, we would, but I don't know what we could do about it. But is there maybe a discussion could be had? Maybe the commission needs to write a letter to support Historic Preservation Office having more resources.
That is possible, right? I believe it probably would be best in the form of either like a resolution or something like that. But I would not be opposed to adding some kind of metric to the recommendation as was suggested. I don't know what that metric would be, but I certainly don't think that's a bad idea. And for what it's worth, I took that as a comment, less as a question, or else I would have addressed it. But I mean, of course, the more people that most of our limitations are due to either lack of funding because, you know, we don't have the staff capability, nor is it necessarily appropriate in all cases for staff to be conducting research on things. Sometimes you want the outside group to be impartial. But our limitations are almost always funding based or staff based. So an increase of staff would certainly alleviate some of these concerns.
Yeah, and more specifically, some funds for educational purposes. I think a lot of difficulties we have as a commission is a lot of applicants come not knowing what the requirements are, and that's been going on for years. And, you know, I personally feel remiss in not recommending that more times, finding a way to a brochure, a flyer, something that tells the people within the historic districts what the requirements are and how they can be assisted.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. It's a recommendation we were very happy to see come up as a result of this master plan process.
For sure.
You can bring a horse to water, you can't make it drink, but we can certainly make the path a little bit easier to find.
For sure.
Well, and it may be a pipe dream, but when I first joined the commission and we talked about educating the public, I had envisioned things like outreach to school children and like sharing materials with the kids in public schools in Jersey City so they could have better appreciation and understanding of the value of historic preservation and get them started young. Get them hooked while they're young, But I don't know if we'll have the funds for that. That's kind of low on the list, but that would be great if we could accomplish that one day.
Yeah, it's something that I remember discussing. B is certainly something that I think has a lot of merit. We are thankful that the Jersey Room at the Public Library actually has been doing more of that than usual.
That's true.
John Beekman, who's the chief librarian and also the head of the Jersey Room, has really taken on a lot of that role from the commission. And it's something that we could definitely either take back or help. I envision more of a complementary relationship where we help supplement some of the great work that the library is doing. But they have, I specifically know for a fact they've been working with some second graders at PS 16, I think, to
Well,
organize
kudos.
some field trips.
All right. Well, my son attends there, so we'll look forward to it. Just to highlight a couple other comments to make sure nothing is overlooked. There was a comment about broadening the focus on preservation so that it's not just high style, but perhaps more vernacular buildings. Is there anything to be said about that?
I'm going to assume that comment was in context of demolitions rather than the existing historic districts, because the existing historic district, our guidelines do a good job of, at least in my professional opinion, do a good job of having our restoration work be guided not by what was typical for the style necessarily, but what was present on the building, either through documentation or physical site evidence. And then some of that stylistic stuff is really a last resort for us.
Yeah, there are a couple of very good examples of where our guidelines held up for buildings that didn't look like much. They were
Right.
definitely not high style, but they wound up being protected.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in terms of demolition, frankly has less to do with style and more to do with what is extant on the building. But it's something that, as we are looking at revising certain parts of our ordinance, both the historic district standards, the historic district guidelines, or demo ordinance, anything like that, it's certainly something that we will heavily consider and hopefully be able to implement.
There was another comment about the city's website and accessibility of some of these materials, and if we could make it more navigable and accessible.
Yeah, so the inventory has and always will be available on the data portal. I can understand that is difficult to navigate sometimes, right? You got to type in the correct combination of words, and I do my best to tag not only every combination of words, but I also sometimes put common misspellings on there too. But our hope is not only to make the inventory more easily available, either through mapping or something like that, but eventually down the road we do also have to resurvey, which will help with both the inventory and accessibility.
Yeah, anecdotal.
And accessibility, or the inventory.
Inventory and
Okay,
accessibility.
sure.
So
I
anecdotally,
heard
there have been times when I myself was trying to locate something on the city website, something that I knew to be there, and I could not for the life of me locate it. So I share that frustration.
For sure.
There was a specific comment about recordings of some of the meetings, I think, being placed online.
Yeah, that's something, that's the last stakeholder meeting for the master plan that was done virtually. We did that meeting in forms of breakout rooms. So it was recorded for example, how our meetings used to be on Zoom. There's a feature where you can you can break out into rooms and you can put people in different rooms. At the time that we planned that meeting, I greatly underestimated how difficult it would be to combine the videos of all of those rooms into one video, because they're all recorded separately and locally. So it was like one room would record over here and one room would record over there. and putting them in a logical order has proven to take far longer than anyone could have anticipated. And I have provided all of the information to the Public Information Office, who's the people. Like I don't have video video editing capabilities, both from a. I don't know how to do it, and I also don't have the software to do it. But I will touch base with their office to see if they've completed it.
There was another comment about errors on the map with numbers that didn't match up, numbers that were missing or duplicated or not on the map.
We'll review that.
And then I think the last one was a suggestion that we do the next plan in 10 years.
So the guidance from the state is to do a master plan element every 10 years. Especially in an urban area like ours that is increasing. The development rate is either high or rapidly increasing. It's certainly something that we would like to do every 10 years. I would love to commit to doing it every 10 years. I don't see why that wouldn't be feasible. It is something that's out of both my hands and the HPC's hands. But it is something that hopefully we will be able to continue to do on a significantly more regular basis than every 23 years.
Whose hands would that be in?
Funding for city council. Of course, becoming a CLG would help because that helps make funding available. It's certainly the availability of CLG grants and the amount would certainly not cover a master plan element. My understanding, or at least last time I looked, a CLG grant would be up to $50,000, and the budget for this master plan element was almost triple that. Maybe less than triple, but more than double. So that funding would help, but it is still something that the city council has to actively allocate money towards.
Would doing the plans more frequently reduce the cost?
I'm not sure. And I think that that's something that you wouldn't be able to answer until you got responses back from a request for proposal. Because it really depends on how much has changed in that time period.
Right. Well, I suppose the more time elapses, the more change there'd be, and
Correct.
consequently, there would be a greater expense associated.
Yes.
So sleeping on it is not necessarily to our benefit.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, just for context too, because it was so long, it was so long between the last draft and the last element and this one that we're proposing tonight. We did essentially have to just completely rewrite it, which is great in some ways because it gave us an opportunity to really dive into some of the things that we thought were missing in the previous element, but of course then meant that it took longer.
Maggie, I have one question.
Sure.
And this pertains to our demolition ordinance. Is there a way that we can require a homeowner who wants to demolish their house that's covered in siding to at least do a first peel to see if there's any historic fabric left? Because we all know as we drive around, I just drove past a house being demolished the other day, was covered in gold aluminum siding, but it was an actually brick house behind it that was being demolished.
I feel that.
And we lose too many houses because of this.
I feel that, and there are times we look at the demos in the office and we're like, well, I know there's a cornice under there, but unfortunately, because they're not designated, I can't. So first of all, even in a historic district, right? If someone doesn't want to do work to their house, I can't make them. All of our reviews are prompted because an applicant is applying for something. In this case, they wouldn't be designated, so the HPC would have no jurisdiction to require them to do anything for their permits. But also, we can't ask, we have absolutely no jurisdiction outside of historic districts to ask an applicant to peel some layers away from the house. I understand your frustration with it. We get frustrated by it too, but there's very little that we can do in that specific case.
I mean, there's nothing to really stop a homeowner from removing historic elements or wrapping the house in vinyl siding and then applying for a demolition permit and covering up their what would
Right.
what would cause them to be denied.
Yep. The only part in the ordinance that we have is that you can't apply for a demo, get denied, and then take the historic elements off your house and apply again. That part is enforceable in our ordinance. Everything else that we've looked into is not something that we would legally be able to enforce.
That's unfortunate.
It is.
Is there any consideration being given to making the penalties more stiffer across the board just to have greater enforceability? Because I know that's something that we've struggled with, I believe, in certain cases. I know there's one case that comes to mind where I was asking you at every meeting, has this been addressed yet? And the response was, there's really not much that can be done at this point. It's going through the process. But at this point, I think it might have been years that the issue remains unchanged.
Enforceability or enforcement in general is such a sore spot in not just with preservation, but with the planning office in general, because we are not our own administrative officers. We don't have our own fine structure. Like Tanya said, all of our enforcement and all of our fines are done through the municipal prosecutor's office. So we don't determine what those fine amounts are or anything like that. And it's up to the municipal prosecutor's office to enforce them.
So I don't even know if it's a question of the amount of the fines. I don't mean to be unduly punitive, but we do need to deter certain bad actors, particularly when they're profit-driven motives and they can safely disregard our ordinance. And even if they get caught, and even if we try to enforce the rules, that they're laughing all the way to the bank essentially. And it seems like oftentimes those sort of mom and pop homeowners are the most concerned about the penalties, but these big developers kind of just shrug it off. And I don't like seeing that, frankly.
No, again, it's a sore spot, not just with preservation, but with planning in general. And it's something that I think a lot of us would actively like to see changed.
Are we addressing it through this plan? Or is there anything we could propose?
Through this plan, no. This plan is really a guiding document for any changes at the local level. And I do not believe, again, we are not, when I say the HPC is not our own administrative officer, that means that anytime one of the inspectors calls me and says, hey, this person is doing work at their property, they don't have their approval posted in their window, do they have an approval? Because we always obviously like to check before we issue any violations. If a violation is to be issued, it's not signed off on by me, even though it's in a historic district and they're talking about a historic preservation issue. It goes to the zoning officer, who consistently signs off on them, but it's up to the municipal prosecutor to enforce them, right? So that's not something that we can really add to the preservation ordinance or the element, because it's not enforced by us.
All right. It just feels like we're spending all this time and effort quibbling over these things, but at the end of the day, if there's no enforceability, then it's all just words on paper.
Right. And we do our best to enforce where we can. There are certain stops that we put on, certain things that we do with historic preservation applications that we can enforce to a degree. So, for example, on every single COA that you see for, someone's addition, or not the mural, but, someone's addition, there's a condition on there that says the architect of record needs to submit a signed and sealed letter and/or signed and sealed as-built plans stating that the work has been done either according to their approval or listing any deviations on the project. And we do that before we issue a certificate of occupancy. We'll go out to the site, we'll confirm that they built everything as they were supposed to, and if they didn't, they fix it. Within reason, of course. Like, for example, someone submitted a deviation request the other day because they had to change the color of the windows in the rear of the building. I'm not gonna sit there and say you can't have a CO over that. But if you guys, I believe it was 2022, there was a property on 8th Street that came in to the commission because at the time of their CO, they had a series of deviations that were not, they had, I think it was 25 deviations from the approved plans. Things like the rear of the building was constructed, they just flipped it. but ranging to the front stoop that they were supposed to restore, they built out of completely different materials. And they came back to the commission for it to be reviewed, and you guys said, we'll only approve these couple of deviations. The stuff you have to go back and you have to fix. And then once they're fixed, you can apply again for your CO. So we do have that level of enforcement that we're able to do, and honestly, that does get a good amount. It catches a good amount of changes. The stuff that it's harder to enforce, the smaller things in between that don't require a certificate of occupancy or a continuing certificate of occupancy. Any other questions about the plan, about anything in the plan that we can, right? Because so the commission, we didn't really mention this at the beginning. The commission is recommended to take formal action on this item tonight. The next step, as San and Siri mentioned, is for review at the planning board for adoption at the May 7th meeting. Staff recommends that the commission make a recommendation to adopt the plan. However, I would like to make that recommendation to adopt it with conditions to amend some of the items that we've discussed tonight. For example, amending the inventory specifically for those Glenwood properties, to address the map on page 9, to work with H2M and Easton and staff to come up with some kind of metric for that staff increase, as we've discussed, things like that, just to so the recommendation would be to recommend to the planning board with conditions, with the condition of staff making amendments as discussed at the meeting.
Do we need to determine those conditions before making a motion?
If you would like to, you can. If you would just like to do a broad condition that as discussed at the meeting, that gives us a little bit of flexibility. I mean, I will be honest with you. I would not like to specify changes to the inventory, just because, again, I was pretty sure I put 130 in there, and now I'm really second guessing myself. So there is the master plan, the draft plan does have to be posted a full 10 days before planning board to meet the state law requirements. So it's not like we'd get carte blanche until May 7th, but I would like to really sit with the inventory over the next couple of days and make sure I got everything physically possible. But if you want to specifically say any of the other ones, I would feel comfortable with that. Or we could just say with amendments as discussed at the meeting.
Well, I mean, I spent a while going off about updating our ordinance to account for climate mitigation measures, or maybe even safety measures. I don't know how the other commissioners feel, if they think that's appropriate to propose or...
Would you like to, so that's from a recommendation within the plan. Would you like to amend that recommendation or expand upon the because the recommendation is to further study to incorporate those?
Amend or expand? I'm not
Right.
catching the distinction.
So, do you want to, that recommendation, hold on, I'm going to go to the plan, that page in the plan. I'm on page, real deep in this inventory. Thank you. All right, still working on getting there. All right, so the phrasing of that recommendation in the inventory is consider incorporating the Department of the Interior's guidelines on flood adaptation for rehabilitation of historic buildings to incorporate standards for historic properties located in identified flood hazard areas. And there is also a recommendation above that to investigate the potential to allow for an increase in permitted height to account for base flood elevation for in a historic district located in a FEMA or NJDEP designated floodplain. And then there's one more that says update existing guidelines to provide specific standards to regulate the incorporation of sustainable building designs, communicate available funding sources. Are there any of those that there's something you want to strike from there or expand upon them?
I don't think there's anything I would strike. I think I'm looking to incorporate that as a specific consideration in addition to what's here.
Oh, you guys have to talk into the mic. Yeah.
Just to clarify, so the specific verbiage you're talking about is the climate mitigation measures and safety considerations. That's what we're talking about for number 22? The
So-
last one that Maggie
right.
read?
So number 22, when, if you have the plan in front of you, we talk about update existing guidelines to provide specific standards to regulate the incorporation of sustainable building designs and to communicate available sources. Do you want me to add more language to it? What would you like me to say?
So I'm not sure exactly what verbiage, I don't have precise verbiage for you, but what I have in mind is to allow our design standards to take into account these considerations broadly as a factor for the Historic Preservation Commission to consider in evaluating applications for certificates of appropriateness, so that we can appropriately consider these factors. Right now, I think it's not something we are considering.
So that again goes back to when you actually adopt
Exactly.
the guidelines. Number 22, number 23, number 24, give the staff enough of meat to actually put that language in the actual ordinance or design guidelines. So, going back to what you want, I think these three have enough where it would be consistent with the historic preservation plan element. So I misunderstood. I thought you wanted specific language in the recommendation for climate change or, which I think the land use plan already talks about. We were just trying to put that to be consistent.
This is very broad, and I know that's by design.
It's
So
supposed
in order to increase the likelihood that this makes it into it, I was suggesting putting a specific item there. I mean, if it doesn't need to be placed there, and we all kind of, if staff is aware of this and can communicate it later, but there's a lot in here. There's a lot of recommendations, and this is a large report. So my concern was if we didn't make this specific recommendation, it would get lost in the shuffle.
The idea of any kind of master plan is to have very general, broad recommendations. That's the purpose of it. So that gives you and the planning board and Maggie the leeway to cater it to what your exact needs would be. So if this is by design in any master plan, it gives you, again, it's like a policy framework. It steers you in that direction, but it doesn't tell you what exactly you should add. Because what happens, if I were to write any specific language, forget what you said, a specific thing, increase by $10,000 your budget. I'm just putting it out there. And the need is for 5,000 or the need is for 25. It just restricts you. So that's one of the reasons why, I mean, this is just an analogy, but that's the reason why any kind of master plan is supposed to be written in such a way that it steers the governing body or whoever is the responsible party in that direction to then adopt what would be ideal for them at that juncture. Because this document, once adopted, holds good for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I understand. I don't think that there's anything in here, though, that specifically says to amend our historic preservation ordinance to account for mitigating floods or climate events or anything to that effect. So I'm not proposing specific language to go into the ordinance, but I'm saying broadly speaking, that should be a consideration that we can utilize in our rationale. And I think that's broad enough for these purposes to suggest that that there's something in there that allows us to consider these factors beyond what we currently are able to consider.
I think what's going to happen, Robert, is because of the recommendation that flooding and safety issues need to be addressed. I think what's going to happen is if new guidelines are going to be written, the commission's going to review those guidelines. Every commission's going to have an opportunity to weigh in. The issue's already been raised in general by this overview. And I think then it just has to come before us and we're going to have to sort it out. So I think that's kind of how it works.
And I will just say recommendation 22 does very specifically say update the guidelines
Yeah.
to incorporate these things. So I agree with you that they, in terms of a priority for us, I know, I mean, I've talked about for years now, even predating this master plan, how desperately our guidelines need to be updated. They've been without at least the master plan, we did a couple re-examinations since 2001. We have not touched the guidelines
I
since
couldn't
2001.
agree more, and I really think that that's what his
Right.
Robert's comment is about,
And
is we're
that's-
suffering from not having that update.
Right. And so it's very much a priority for us from a staff level. And I also think that a guideline revision also helps us accomplish another goal, which is to help educate the public, right? With a guideline revision, that also comes better written guidelines and guidelines that are easier for the public to understand. And I think the accessibility and understanding of the guidelines is going to be very important specifically for all of those sustainability, climate change, flood adaptation guidelines. Because unfortunately, they're becoming more and more important.
Right.
So one thing what I would suggest then to go back to your point, Robert, was we put the implementation schedule to medium.
Mm-hmm.
I could just do it a short-term goal, so that's 1 to 2 years.
Sure.
So that's the edit, so that takes care of your concern as well, that it should be high on the priority list.
Yes, and I think also we kind of led by talking specifically about building height as a specific sort of mitigating measure, and to my mind, what I'm proposing is broader than that because it doesn't propose any specific mitigation measure. It just allows us to contemplate mitigation measures in evaluating applications.
Okay.
But all right, we can move on.
Okay. Any other?
Recommendation 2. Do we have the ability to expand on that or make a suggestion on it?
So recommendation 2 in here is just so everyone, establish program to provide incentives such as rehabilitation tax abatements through the designation of quote areas in need of rehabilitation and a low interest / no interest loan program to promote the preservation and rehabilitation of existing buildings. So that's something that the city council would specifically have to do. That is something that I would imagine is going to take quite a while to implement. However, something that we could do in the meantime that does not necessarily need to be a recommendation in this plan, just you're looking for an expansion on it. There are programs in the Division of Community Development that do specific things like this, right? No interest and low interest loans. I'm not going to bury the lead here. The wait list for them is monumental, but we could do a better job of promoting them and incorporate the use of those loans into guidelines.
I guess my question more so falls along the line of tax abatements. Is it, if this tax abatement were to happen, let's say a house that's referred to us, now, do we know if that tax abatement affects what's supposed to go to the public schools from the property taxes?
Oh, I have no idea.
No, it's a short-term tax abatement. You're talking about those are the pilots where it is, 5% goes to the county, 95% goes to the governing body. But even with those these days, a percentage can go, it's between the governing body and the developer. But these are short-term, 5-year tax abatements. It's sometimes, each town is different, but what we are seeing here, we're getting into the weeds of it. But what this is saying, there's a lot of description in the body of the master plan about explaining this process. All we are saying is we have honed in on this recommendation, who's the implementing party, and what goals it would achieve of the master plan, and what's the completion time frame.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll also add too that part of the idea is also to kind of lean into, again, the broad recommendation to be able to provide more carrots rather than sticks. That analogy was brought up earlier of, establishing incentive programs, broadly speaking, trying to emphasize the positive on that and kind of enabling that through the master plan process.
Can we amend recommendation number 5, which pertains to the hiring of additional staff? Right now, it's designated as a medium goal. Can we change that to short-term goal?
Sure. We could do that. Or we could do it ongoing, because ongoing would be on a rolling basis. Would that make sense, or do you want it short or on? I don't know.
I think ongoing is probably more appropriate. Because again, just when you said earlier that you don't want to provide a specific number, because then if something goes above or below, it restricts you. If we don't complete that in 1 to 2 years, I don't want city council to turn around and be like, well, it wasn't a priority at the beginning, like you said it was. It's not one now. So I think ongoing, saying it's on a rolling basis makes sense.
Right, and then as the need arises and need increases, you can hire more people.
Precisely.
And in addition to staff, what about budget? Can there be a recommendation made on budget?
No, master
No.
plans don't.
Can't do that,
No.
right? Give it a try.
It's on the record that you asked. Okay. Any other questions, amendments? Again, the recommendation from staff on this is to recommend to the planning board with amendments, with the condition to address the amendments as discussed at the meeting. I think that's the best way to, rather than highlighting individual things.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, move to a roll
The
call
motion
vote.
is to recommend to the planning board to adopt the master plan
With the
historic
condition.
element with conditions as
As-
discussed in this evening's meeting.
Beautiful. All right, we'll move to I have Tony with the motion, Daniel with the second. We'll move to a roll call vote. Commissioner Garriga,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandcamp,
Aye.
Commissioner Cronin,
Aye.
Commissioner Amatuza,
Aye.
Commissioner Gunther's absent, Commissioner Lewis is absent, Commissioner Sakong is absent, Commissioner Blazak is absent, Commissioner Gucciarda,
Aye.
and Chairman Gordon.
Aye.
Right, there are 6 votes in favor, none against, no abstentions. The recommendation to planning board is approved.
Thank you for
very
your
much.
time.
Thank you very
You
much.
have a great day.
Appreciate your time.
Appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for all your work.
And absolute special commendation to Maggie and Tanya and the whole team. They worked very, very hard with us for a long period of time.
Sure
so
they
if we
did.
didn't thank them enough,
Sure they
Yes.
did.
All right.
All right, with that, I will now call case H24-7. The applicant is Cecilia De Leon, architect, on behalf of Emily and William Looker, owner. The address is 575A Jersey Avenue, a non-contributing 2-story residential building built circa 1975 in the Harsimus Cove Historic District. This application is for a certificate of appropriateness for interior renovation and a full-height rear addition visible from the public right-of-way.
All right. I was going to ask if you needed a dongle, but I don't think you do.
Pretty.
Staff notes that Ceci has been previously qualified as an architect in front of this board many times.
excellent. Turned your mic off.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And states where you're from.
Cecilia, Cecilia, DeLeon, Deleon.
One second before you start, sir. Tony, did you decide about your
Cool.
vote?
Cool. All right.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Cecilia Dalian, I'm an architect for 575A Jersey Avenue, and I'll be making a presentation for a rear addition to an existing 2.5-story non-contributing building in the Harsimus Cove Historic District. Just to orient yourselves, these are excerpts of the construction documents. It's easier to see, so I reformatted it on a different page. I'll start with a little background on the project. No, I was orienting you. So here, oh good, my mouse shows up. This is Jersey Avenue. It's Jersey Avenue between 2nd and 3rd Street. We're talking about this one building way to the right over here. It would be 575A. The clients have owned this property since about 2017. They're a couple with 3 young children. They love JC. They want to remain in the area, but they need to expand their house in order to better suit their family. Historically, this property was part of a larger parcel, which included the 3 neighboring buildings to the south here. The tax records, I should go here. The photos for this property is 1974, is the picture for 575A. So it looks pretty much the same, except there's now a vestibule that was built here, and it's all masonry facade. However, if you look at the tax records for the building down the street at 571, it shows this nice old building, which is the original building that took up the 4 lots.
Church.
So that was a 1938. That's a 1938 photo. The record states that it was owned by St. Mary's Church, and it was rented by the State Department of Labor, who then sublet part of the building to the State Probation Office and the Department of Hygiene and Sanitation. Part of the building was also used in an industrial museum for safety devices and a rehabilitation clinic for workmen's comp cases. As far as I can tell, it existed like this up until around 1948 or so. Then I believe there was a fire, and the building was demolished. And then the lots were then subdivided into the 4 as they exist today. So here you could tell it's the 2.5 stories with a gable roof. And these were built around, I think, 1961 or so, and then the additions happened later after that. So the buildings are set back from the property line, which is here, to allow for parking, right in the front. Key Food, I'm standing at the Key Food looking across Jersey Avenue. So all of these 4 lots have parking, drive-up, curve right in the front, and they all pretty much look the same. If we go to the plans, so the top ones here are the existing plans. They're a little bit small. So there's a living room in the front, the ground level. The middle section has the utility and a powder room. Rear section has the kitchen. There's also a single-story rear addition that was done later with a dining room. Second floor has 3 bedrooms and two full baths. And then there's a gable roof here that you could see here. That's accessed through just a pull-down ladder. You could see in the section here, and this is the existing dining room, single-story addition. The neighboring building here is a big 4-story building, and it has a little bit of an alley and then a shorter rear facade, a rear back building. And it's a dry cleaner on the ground level, so there's this big exhaust vent that runs within that alley as well. I'll skip over to the proposed plans at the moment. So to expand the house, what the client wanted to do is make it a little bit more usable for their family. So they were building a 2nd-story addition above the existing single-story within there. We're going to push the bedrooms to the back, move the laundry area to have a laundry area on the 2nd floor, a larger study space for the kids, and then a stair that goes up to a 3rd floor addition. This third floor addition is going to be just the back half of the property, so it'll go from the ridge line up into the back to be level with the four-story addition from 577, the corner building next door. There's also a little balcony at the rear. So if you look at the sightline photo, we have the existing building here. So, and the back of the addition will end at the back of this property with the single-story addition here. So this ridge line does end up about 5'4", 5'5", above the existing ridge that's there. We're keeping the roof pitch relatively low, just to get that where we need it to be. Let's see. So on the construction, as we were initially talking with the HPO, we started with, well, what's shown on the construction documents at the moment is simple, to tone it down, just the fiber cement siding, really on the front, with a coping parapet on the top. However, to simplify it a little bit more, and to minimize the visual impact of the addition, we're proposing fiber cement panels in lieu of the lap siding. We think that the panelized system is less busy, it's a little bit more contemporary, and it's better suited for this project. So this would be our preferred approach. In terms of color, we're not touching really the masonry portion is going to remain. The existing black asphalt roof is going to remain, and the windows are going to remain. In terms of the panels, we're going to have toward the warm grays. Here it's going to be the James Hardie pearl gray, keep it toward the warm tones. And then the trim and the coping will be a little bit darker, you know, in aged pewter within there. This is a little rendering of what it might look like, you know. So here you have the black roof and then the little addition popping up within there. The rear facade, you can't see from the public right away, but we'll show it here, is also a panelized system, probably in an Arctic white, is what we're thinking, with black windows and black doors with a wood canopy across the back and black vertical regaling. This addition is also the second story, and the roof is also, so this is the facade on 3rd Street. So here you could see this little alley. This is the front building where the dry cleaner is, and then there's an existing, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 families at the rear building on that property. This little alley before, you could see the exhaust vent kind of doing a weird thing and comes up this building and then across. And then there's this little single-story addition for the entry to the back building. So our little addition will be slightly visible. This little thing you're seeing in the way back there is actually the building that's way down the street, the top of that one. But ends up pretty much kind of where our addition and the balcony will end up. So this facade will be similar to whatever we do in the front. So it would be panelized, is our preferred approach rather than the lap siding. So that's basically the extent of it. You know, I'll end here, and if you have any questions.
Any commissioners have any questions?
I have one question. The visible extension that we're viewing there with the panels, did you consider possibly making it the same color as the existing roof so it doesn't stand out as a separate addition structure?
I think the roof being black, it's really dark. I think we were trying to avoid like the dark going up. I mean, we are doing an aged pewter and keeping it toward the warmer, darker gray tones. I think black would be a little bit too stark within here. If anything, I would like to lighten the roof, but that's not part of our purview.
What is that roof material?
It's just asphalt,
Yeah, okay.
so it's nothing, it's not very nice or ready.
Yeah, not
So,
a great thing to mimic, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to agree with Stephen. I think it would make more sense for it to all be one color and draw less attention. It's less distracting that way in my eye.
I think that's why, we were going toward like a darker trim, oops.
But the trim calls it out too, you know what I mean? The trim and the division between the panels, you wind up seeing this large rectangle divided because the trim is darker and the body is lighter. So even if it was all darker, even if it wasn't black, at least it would feel unified and disappear a little bit more.
So what
That's if the commission agrees that it should be visible.
what are the neighboring roofs covered with? They look distinctly
Asphalt
different.
tile, it's just different colors. I believe, these are lighter gray. I think 571, if I go back to this
These are
picture,
shingles.
just redid theirs in a black as well.
Right.
So this one this is an older photo, but this was recently done in black. These two are lighter. So they're all different.
Right.
And did you say the building went up in 1962?
From what I could tell from the tax records, it looked like 61.
61.
The original portion, although I'm not sure I think the vestibules were done later.
Yeah, the vestibule on we're looking at the building all the way to the right. The brick building towards the center, that vestibule was completed in 2008 as part of a COA. And Robert, these buildings are listed as non-contributing.
They're non-contributing, yeah.
I raise this because I'm not necessarily suggesting it, just thinking out loud as I'm off to do, whether rather than making the addition match the current roof conditions, if the roof could be updated to match the addition so it's more palatable. Because if it's from the 60s, I don't know how much historic value the roof
I'm
material choice has.
not exactly sure if this was re-roofed. I'm sure it has been re-roofed since the 60s. If it's a second layer
renovated.
on top of there, maybe. It wasn't part of the budget or the scope, original scope. But we
If
could
I
certainly
remember
ask.
correctly, before the house sold in 2017, it underwent a major renovation and every aspect of it was done. The facade was made brick, the roof, the whole interior was gutted and it was done over.
That's it.
So is it feasible to then change the roofing material to bring it into conformity with the addition to help it blend better without having that black asphalt?
Again, it's going to be a budget issue, and it's going to be up to my clients. We can ask,
Okay.
but they're not here tonight to ask that question, but we could certainly make the suggestion.
Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, does that conclude your testimony? Anything else you want to wrap up with?
No? that's
Okay.
about it.
All right. Then we can move into public comment. Staff sees no members of the public present. Tom, you don't count.
That all the time.
Motion to open and close.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we can move into staff comments on this. So, earlier tonight when we were talking about how the guidelines need an update, you are looking at a prime example of why the guidelines need an update, in that we have no guidelines for non-contributing buildings.
I was going to say, what do we?
It is something that is a huge gap in our guidelines right now. We treat non-contributing buildings essentially as, let's just make sure that they don't call attention away from the other historic resources. And that is just about the only guidance that I have to offer you here. We have, so just as a past history on this row, so you can see two of the buildings in that photo towards the bottom are brick. My understanding is the one to the left is also brick now. We have, as these applicants have come in, we have asked them to at least change their front facade material to the predominant building material in the district so that they blend a little bit more. They don't call attention to themselves, and your eye just kind of grazes right past them. In this case, that is my understanding of the application here is while they are putting an addition on and it is visible from the public right of way, the intention is for your eye to just graze past it. The visibility here is truly less of a concern because these buildings are non-contributing. So it's just more of a, do we think that the proposal here successfully accomplishes this idea that we want the non-contributing buildings to blend into the background? In this case, I
Which is
do.
why I restricted my comment to just calling attention to the addition that's
Right.
on top. If it could be less visible, that would be the goal.
Yeah, and I do agree with you. I agree with the suggestion to match it. I don't know if, honestly, I really don't think making it darker is going to make it more visible than it already is. I don't necessarily think we need to make it black. The roof is like more of a charcoal color. I
Yes.
think that we could work at the staff level to find kind of a middle ground between the dark colored asphalt roof and the lighter gray that they've proposed here. We were happy to see the inclusion of panels rather than the lap, because I do think that will help it blend a little bit more, and if nothing else, will look at least like some type of utilitarian feature of the roof line. So in the staff report, we have both in the staff report, we have recommendations for approval. If you guys agree that it does not have an adverse impact to the district, because again, that's what we're assessing here, is if it has an adverse impact to the district. Our normal design guidelines really don't serve us particularly well here.
Well, and Maggie, we've moved past the plan, but maybe these non-contributing should be treated like the transition areas we were talking about. It has a similar objective.
Right. Yeah. Where you're focusing on like a contextual nature and like building form and building shapes rather than like specific materials and things like that. So in the staff report, there are recommended conditions. They are our standard conditions. We have no additional things to add here. Because at this point, I am just considering any lighting being downcast as a standard condition at this point. There is no lighting proposed at that rear deck, but if the applicant wants to put some there, it just has to be downcast. Alternatively, if there is a belief that this creates a distracting element and would have an adverse effect on the historic resources, there are citations in the staff report if the commission is inclined to deny the application. But again, the staff recommendation here is that this is not going to have an adverse impact. This is not going to make this non-contributing row any more or less. I am sure they love their house, and I'm so happy they want to stay in Jersey City. This is not going to make it any more or less what it is.
I'm sure you'd rather get rid of the parking rather than that.
Yeah, well, if they're proposing to change
Well,
the park, if
they
they were,
all used to have one parking space, like the house on the far left. And I believe the house two over, when we approved that, they were supposed to add landscaping, and they did not.
Right.
It's still two parking spaces
Wow, have a good memory, Paul.
for some things.
yeah, we're not proposing any front changes, so couldn't get in there with that. But again, staff recommendation is to approve with conditions, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll make a motion to approve with conditions.
Second.
Okay, Paul, and then Corey. All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Sandkamp?
Aye.
Commissioner Cronin?
Aye.
Commissioner Amatuza?
Aye.
Commissioner Garriga?
Aye.
Commissioner Gunther is absent. Commissioner Lewis is absent. Commissioner Sakong is absent. Commissioner Blazak is absent. Vice Chair Gucciardo?
Aye.
And Chairman Gordon.
Aye.
Okay, there are 6 votes in favor, none against, no abstentions. The COA with conditions is granted. Thank you, guys.
It is freezing.
So cold.
All right, I am sorry to keep everyone in the cold a little bit longer. We do have some last agenda items to take care of.
Thanks for your patience, by the way.
Interesting.
All right, moving on the agenda for tabled cases. I have an update on the French American Academy. And the update is that I reached out to them on March 7th asking for an update and heard no response. In that email where I reached out to them, I did give them a date of April 15th to either respond and say the application was still active or submit additional materials for the commission to review. I had sent them a copy of the transcript. I sent a copy of the video stating what the commission was looking for. No response. I emailed them again on April 10th, following up, asking for a response. No response. So, that being said, it is staff's opinion that this application is no longer active and recommends a motion to dismiss without prejudice.
I make a motion to dismiss without prejudice.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Video off the agenda.
We.
Guys, there might be a point in this calendar year we have no tabled cases.
And we're ready for a motion
Well, no, we still have.
for nomination.
Oh, well, yes, we're going to get there. Hold on, let me finish.
Weren't we talking about amending also so that we could more easily move things off of our agenda that are stale?
We were, and we didn't really pursue it knowing that we probably weren't going to have anything left on the agenda. But that is something that I think would be an ordinance update. And it's something that when we do our list of ordinance updates, we can look at. Because I think there's a lot of things that legally we have to look at to see if we can do or not. There's a fly. All right. I have no update from the temple. We have no demolitions to review. And that leads us to so this is technically also our reorganization meeting, as is every April. And because we are in an off year where we elected new officers last year, we did not need to have a committee to source new officers. So I have reached out to both Robert, Stephen, and myself to confirm that everyone is interested in being elected back to their seat for the next year. So if anyone has any questions on officers, we can discuss. If not, we can make a motion to elect Robert as chair, Stephen as vice chair, and me as secretary for another one-year term.
I make that motion to nominate Robert. Gordon.
Commissioner Gordon.
Steve Gucciardo and Maggie O'Neill. Robert to chair, Stephen to vice chair, and Maggie O'Neill to secretary.
Second.
Sorry, that was kind of a sloppy mo.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. I will remind you all now, we need new officers next year. Just think about it. Robert and Steve, I can still be secretary next year. Robert and Stephen cannot be chair and vice chair next year. Always good to start thinking about that now so we're not scrambling in March.
Speaking of reminders, did everyone do their financial disclosure? That's always fun.
That is an excellent. What? I don't ever get copied on those emails, so I have no idea when you guys have to do your financial disclosure. But Jonathan is saying it is the 30th. That is an excellent reminder because I have seen them fine people for not doing it. So it takes like 5 minutes.
It does. Especially if you've already done it.
Yeah.
All the information's
And if you
repopulated. So it takes a minute. I did it the first day.
Yeah.
You're so good. You're so good.
Robert, I thought you were about to say that it's tax day and you have about an hour, 2 hours and 15 minutes to get that in.
Yeah.
File your extension. All right. We have no resolutions to introduce, discuss, or memorialize. We do not need an executive session, and that just leaves us with adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Right. It is 9:47 p.m. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.